This video will demonstrate how to modify transactions from an external source. This feature makes it possible to remotely edit a transaction's payout, revenue, or whether it is approved for an affiliate. In addition to editing your own transactions remotely, you can now grant access to a merchant to allow them to edit their own transactions. With any feature dealing outside the secure environment of the LinkTrust app, we want to make sure you have a way to enhance the layers of security on this feature. That means you have to enable this feature for each campaign individually, give it a custom password, and if you want, you may restrict changes to come from specific whitelisted IP addresses. If you are a merchant or work with any merchants, you'll love this feature. Now merchants can modify transactions within LinkTrust by passing their own ID from their backend Office CRM or shopping cart instead of needing to record and use LinkTrust identifiers. To enable external transaction modifications, select Campaigns from the top menu. Search for the campaign you wish to turn this feature on. Select the Edit Campaign icon to access the campaign settings. Scroll down to the conversion tracking options. Select the checkbox Allow External Transaction Modification. Enter a security password. If you want these external modified transactions to only come from a known IP address, select the Allow Modifications from the whitelist IPs. Now select Update to save your settings. A yellow notification bar will appear at the top, confirming your changes were successfully saved. Now that this campaign is enabled, let's look at the parameters it takes to modify these transactions. We'll do that in PowerPoint. LinkTrust has 3 identifiers for locating the transactions you want to modify. 1, the LinkTrust transaction ID, 2, the click ID, and 3, a combination between the merchant reference ID and the campaign ID. It is important to note, only one of these methods can be used at one time per transaction. Once the transaction is located, you can now modify the transaction in 3 ways. You can modify the affiliate payout, merchant payout, or transaction status. It is important to note that you do not need symbols in the currency. For added security, the password you placed in LinkTrust when enabling the transaction modification feature must be passed in for each modification. Now that we know what it takes to modify the transactions externally, let's look at the actual URLs needed to perform this action. The first is the transaction ID. The difference between each URL is simply the identifier. Here, in bold, you'll notice that the identifier is transaction ID. For click ID, it's click ID. And for the combination of merchant reference ID and CID, it's simply merchant reference ID and CID. When posting in modifications, there isn't a required order for these name value pairs. When a transaction modification is done from an external source, LinkTrust will respond with the following server responses. LinkTrust server responses are in XML format. For each success or failure server response, LinkTrust will pass back the identifying parameter that was passed in. For example, the transaction ID, click ID, or a combination of merchant reference ID and campaign ID. We've also highlighted all the other important areas in a server response. Whether or not the modification was successful or not, the transaction ID or merchant reference ID or click ID that was associated with this transaction, and what attributes were actually changed for the transaction. For each failed request, LinkTrust will include an error message reflecting the reason for the failed modification. This helps to understand why a transaction being modified failed during the process. All of the items discussed in this video are documented in our in-system support help links. You can access this help link in the campaign settings by hovering your mouse over external transaction modification. For additional support in setting up this feature internally or with your merchant, please contact LinkTrust Support. Thank you.